This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by UFM Underwear. Head to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN for $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear, support your manhood.
Gators Breakdown, the Gators fan podcast, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters, and you can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. And the big game is finally here, the top 10 matchup versus the Auburn Tigers. And joining me on this episode to preview the top 10 matchup between Florida and Auburn is Phillip Jordan of Last Word on College Football, where he covers the Auburn Tigers, also of the Talkin SEC Podcast, and 96.9 The Legend out of Dothan, Alabama. Before we get there, remember you can find Gators Breakdown at news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes there. Also, catch us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. When using those services, please share, rate, and review the show. Go leave us a rating on iTunes. Really helps us out a lot and gets the word out there to Gator Nation what Gators Breakdown is all about. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. And don't forget, every week, a News4Jax exclusive Talking with Troop, where former Gators tight end Ben Troop joins me once a week this season over at News4Jax and gives his thoughts on the Gators like only Ben can. Of course, he'll bring it this week, talking this big matchup versus Auburn, so you don't want to miss Ben and his thoughts there. He brings it every time, and that's exclusively on news4jax.com/Gators Breakdown. Phillip Jordan of Last Word on College Football, the Talkin SEC Podcast, and 96.9 The Legend out of Dothan, Alabama, joins us this week on Gators Breakdown to preview the Auburn Tigers. Phillip, this is a big one, man. The top 10 matchup in front and center of the college football world.
Oh, man, absolutely. I've been looking forward to this game, Auburn at Florida, because I tell you, when you look at the recent history of these two teams, I mean, they don't play often anymore. It's very rare we get to see an Auburn-Florida matchup in SEC football, but when they do, it just seems like the last couple of times it's been pretty memorable when these two get together.
Absolutely. I mean, we can go back, with our age, we go back to, mid-'90s and Terry Bowden upsetting Florida in back-to-back years, 93, 94. Of course, for Florida fans, it stings a little bit. It was our only loss in 2006 on our way to a national championship. You give Tebow his first loss in his Heisman year of 2007. I was going over with Will Miles earlier in kind of one of our, previewing the game a little bit in a previous episode here. And it says, man, when Auburn beats Florida, those losses sting.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I'm a little bit maybe – I don't remember much of the Nix to Sanders, the early 90s ones, the one in the swamp, like you just mentioned, like Terry Bowden when he was there at Auburn. But, for me, my Auburn history kind of starts around 96, 97 toward the end of the Terry Bowden era there at Auburn. But so for me, the one that sticks out is 2001. Florida's number one. I mean, they were blowing everybody out. I mean, everybody was wondering, is this the greatest college football team of all time with Florida? Rex Grossman, Jabbar Gaffney, Rashae Caldwell, all them guys. Steve Spurrier's final year, they're at Florida. And I remember that game clearly. I mean, nobody gave Auburn a chance. And they hosted number one Florida. And Jason Campbell, I mean, way back. This was when he was a true freshman quarterback or redshirt freshman. He was a freshman. Inexperienced, Cadillac, Ronnie Brown, they were freshmen. So for Auburn to make that upset, which Grossman helped out that day with, I think, 4 interceptions against Auburn. It was a classic game. Of course, the wind was howling, I think 30-mile-an-hour winds, and Damon Duvall hitting that big field goal at the end to beat Florida. So for me, that's one that really sticks out to me. And of course, you talk about the ones, the Tim Tebow ones, 06 and 07 games. And I don't think we need to mention the last time they played in 2011, Muschamp versus Chiswick. I remember that. I remember my first thing saying, I just wasted 3.5 hours watching that mess, because I as an Auburn guy, even though they won the game, I was not even happy with that because how ugly that game was between those two teams.
There were a lot of those games under Will Muschamp that we tend to forget, even though they were wins. The way the game turned out, it was a lot like that game on the other end for the Gators too. So, Phillip, this, for old school Gator fans, this is, this is still a rivalry to them. They grew up, or while they were going to games throughout years in the swamp. Auburn was a yearly occurrence, a yearly rivalry. Only behind Georgia in the SEC, and it's the closest campus for Florida in the conference. From Gainesville to excuse me. To Auburn, it's not that far. It's the closest campus in conference for the Gators, and these teams don't play anymore. The older fans and fans like me who grew up in the '90s and watched how close and competitive these games were, we wish they played more. Dan Mullen has mentioned it as well, that he wished the SEC would kind of come around, or maybe even playing more conference games, or figure out a way teams from opposite divisions can play more. How are Auburn fans looking at this game? Of course, now that it's here, of course, being a top 10 game helps, and it's a road game for Auburn. But like I said, the old school Gator fans love this game.
Yeah, I think Auburn fans are excited about it right now as well. And just a few I have talked to thus far, the sensible Auburn fans, not the crazy ones. The sensible Auburn fan is they're very confident coming into this game, thinking Auburn has a good shot at winning this. Get to 6-0 going into their first bye week of the season. But I think a lot of Auburn fans are also kind of saying, but let's just not get too confident. Hope the team doesn't start reading their press clippings, getting excited about what they have done so far this season. Fantastic resume through 5 games. Just keep going, moving along, and hopefully, the players don't get too big of a head. But kind of circle back. I think just confidence. Auburn fans feel a lot more confident about this game, because I'll be honest with you, when the season started, I looked at Auburn's schedule. I said Auburn's probably looking at 7-5 this season, because the Oregon game, A&M was going to be daunting in my opinion. Going to Gainesville, Baton Rouge, playing Alabama and Georgia, despite those two being at home, because you were going to have a freshman quarterback either way with a Gatewood or Bo Nix. So now seeing what Auburn has done, I feel like I have more confidence in this team as well. But it's also a tricky situation, because you don't want to be too confident, too high if you're the Auburn team, and maybe start looking past Florida, because you absolutely should not do that.
Phillip, it's funny. I think you had me on your podcast the week after SEC Media Day, and you made me explain why I had Auburn third in the West, and how I liked them better than I did Texas A&M. And part of it was that I figured Gus Malzahn would figure something out on offense, and this defensive front, of course, has stepped up to the plate. Take us through Auburn season so far. This is a resume so far that many are calling the best in the country. Maybe some feel maybe they shouldn't have won the Oregon game to come out of there. But since that game, they've kind of gotten better week by week, and then the last 2 weeks you went to College Station, beat Texas A&M, and then just put it on Mississippi State.
Yeah, this season, when you talk about the open game against Oregon, that's kind of the whole every week is when you look at Bo Nix and the Auburn team as a whole, it's kind of the same story, getting better each week. And that Oregon game, Auburn showed signs in the first half offensively being able to move the ball, but I feel like a couple of times in that first half, especially, the game was too big, too fast for Bo Nix. And but when it came down to crunch time, he made the plays he had to make for Auburn to win. The 4th down scramble to get the first down to keep the drive going. I mean, everybody talks about the Seth Williams catch in that game. For me, it was that 4th and 3. He dived for the first down, because without that Seth Williams play doesn't happen. Then you go into the next game against Tulane. They really did not play well. I mean, they looked bad offensively. And then the Kent State game, it looked a little bit better with Bo Nix. And then, like you said, A&M. He played a lot better there, very poised. But coming out of that game, though, it felt like the criticism and the worry for Auburn, and Bo Nix and this team, they were missing the deep passes. Something that a lot of Auburn fans got aggravated with last season with Jarrett Stidham. Receivers would be open down the field. He would overthrow them and miss them. And then, like you said, Mississippi State last week, it just came together where it finally looked like, okay, Auburn is moving in the right direction here. And I'm going to tell you what, and no one is ever going to vote me as the president of the Gus Malzahn fan club. Yeah. I have gotten slack before for my criticism of Gus Malzahn. But I will say this about Gus. When he gets in a groove calling plays, and what way he is doing right now, he did this in 2013 and back in 2010 when he was the offense coordinator for Gene Chizik and they won the national title. When he gets in a groove calling plays, Auburn really gets rolling, and they're hard to stop But, it's also one of them things I think you kind of wonder, maybe you're Auburn fan, how are they peaking too early at the same time?
Well, of course, Gator fans are all too familiar with Joey Gatewood, of course, and his commitment to Auburn back in the day. And his recruitment, Florida was interested. He's just from down the road here in Jacksonville, where I'm from. I got to know him and cover him in his high school football as an incoming this year with quarterback battle with Bo Nix. This Bo Nix, who's won the job, he's come on the scene as a true freshman quarterback. You kind of mentioned not necessarily the best stats when you're looking at it, but coming off of his best performance of the season at versus Mississippi State. And while the stats aren't there, like you said, he's made the plays when needed.
Yeah, one thing when I was looking at some numbers from him for the first 5 games, I was looking at it on Sunday, and something that really stuck out to me. Okay, the last 3 games, here's how many pass attempts he has. Against Kent State, 16, A&M 20, Mississippi State 21. In those games, 12 of 16, 12 of 20, 16 of 21. So that's keeping his attempts down. And those first 2 games against Oregon and Tulane, he threw 31 and 37 pass attempts. For a true freshman, that's a lot of passes to be to put on him. 13 for 31 against Oregon, 19 of 37 against Tulane. So that's a big reason those first 2 games why his completion percentage is down right now. I mean, right now he's at 58%, but you would look at I don't have the actual percentage in front of me, but when you look at these last couple of games, much higher, better, decisions passing, and Auburn has been able to get the running game going as well, because I also say this about those first 2 games where he threw over 30 times. The offensive line was not playing well the first couple of games of the season, and that was an issue last year as well. We're not protecting Jarrett Stidham, and Auburn didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher last season either. First time in a long time, Auburn has not had a guy go over 1,000 yards a season. I believe the last time was 2008, Tommy Tuberville's last year there at Auburn. So the offensive line was having issues, and I talk about improving. That's another thing for Auburn that has improved is that offensive line, especially in run blocking. Whitlow is now getting holes to go through, is opening things up for him. He's having some big games for Auburn. And then on the jet sweep, Auburn likes to run, mostly with Anthony Schwartz, but sometimes with Eli Stove. Cam Martin gets in there, Shivers as well. So the offensive line has been key, too, for Auburn getting better each week. And now that they've been able to run the ball, that's really taking a lot of pressure off Bo Nix as well.
Yeah, that's definitely where I was going next. Phillip, we know Malzahn's offense works best when that run game's working, and working so far this year. And like you said, probably too many pass attempts in those first 2 weeks. And, I mean, we know Gus's offense works when that run game going back to when they were competing for the national championship, the year where they go to eventually lose to Florida State. But Nick Marshall's there and running Gus's offense to some of the best we've seen it there, and power run game, misdirection run game. You got that with Boobie Whitlow or the sweeps with Anthony Schwartz so far in his return. I think Gus has this run game where he wants it. How big was the return of Schwartz to maybe open up this offense?
Oh, it was huge. And, the fact is, I mean, he can take it, to the house at any moment. And especially, I think he has most of his touchdowns he has scored in his 2 years at Auburn have actually been rushing, not receiving. And so for him, that's big. And when Auburn's offense has always worked, it's been with that jet sweep play. And maybe last year Schwartz wasn't quite ready, still a freshman, to run that play, or Gus didn't have the confidence in him there. And then Eli Stove was hurt all last year, because in 2017, when Auburn went to the SEC championship game, Eli Stove was in that role a lot in the jet sweeps off the Wildcat plays with, when they take the quarterback out, and then just a regular jet sweep play on his own. So he was a playmaker. He could take it to the house at any moment. So without him there last year, the lack of experience with sports, like I said, maybe Gus Malzahn was not confident with him yet in that role. That was a big part of offense that went away. And then you talk about Auburn relying on the running game, and something that has aggravated Auburn fans for the last couple seasons is the fact that Gus has been bringing in pocket passers, pro-style quarterbacks. You talked about Nick Marshall. Before this year, that was really the last time you really saw Auburn's offense look like the way Gus, envisions it, how it's supposed to run. Because, you look at Jarrett Stidham last year. He's a pocket passer. I look at Jarrett Stidham and Bo Nix as this. I think they're actually the same quarterback passing. I think Jarrett Stidham is one of the best throwers of football you're going to see. But he doesn't like to run. I don't think he can't run. I just don't think he likes to. It's not his comfort. Then you had Sean White before that. And Sean White's one of the toughest kids you're going to see play the quarterback position. I hated it went the way it went with him with his exit from Auburn 2 seasons ago. But another thing with him, he could run, and he was effective at times. But, he just was so undersized to play in the SEC. He struggled with that, and he got hurt a lot, and that was a problem. And then you go back to Jeremy Johnson, which any Auburn fans that are listening to this probably just cussed at me for saying that name about the Auburn program. But he was a pocket passer too, not really a runner. So it's been a while since you've seen Auburn with a quarterback like Bo Nix, and Joey Gatewood does as well when he comes into the game, runs some wildcat, runs some, read plays for Auburn as well. It's been a while since we've seen the true Auburn offense, and I also think that also correlates with the fact is that Gus Malzahn back to calling plays as well. He looks a lot happier, a lot more comfortable, and he's having more fun too since he's back to being the primary play caller for Auburn as well.
Yeah, absolutely, he does. Phillip Jordan of Last Word on College Football and the Talkin SEC Podcast. And out of 96.9, the legend out of Dothan, Alabama, joining us here on Gators Breakdown, previewing the Auburn Tigers. Florida struggles running the ball, Phillip. No surprise, through 5 games so far. Auburn's defense and that defensive line stout at stopping running the opposing offense there. This doesn't figure to be a game where Florida can line up and run the ball. And looking at it, there might be some creativity on the way to help there. But for the most part, it'll be the Florida passing game that needs to get going. What should we be looking for in the pass defense from the Tigers?
And I was thinking about this. With Auburn's defense are really good. Like you said, you mentioned that defensive front. Marlon Davidson, Derek Brown. Nick Coe. All them guys. Big Cat Bryant. I mean, that's an NFL quality defensive front. I mean, Marlon Davidson and Derek Brown could be right now playing in the NFL. They decided to come back. So Auburn fans very happy about that. That was the best recruiting job they did, I think, to Auburn this past all season. But I would say if you want to attack this Auburn defense, the pass is probably the best way to go about it. And the fact is their secondary has veterans, with Jeremiah Denson and Daniel Thomas there. So, I mean, they have veterans there. But I would say, A&M, when they got back in the game a few weeks ago, it was through the air. I mean, they could not run the ball against Auburn. 56 yards rushing, I believe, in that game. But they threw for over 300 when they had to throw it. You may say, yeah, Auburn was playing back at that point. But still, there's been times this season where I've seen where teams can hit the big play against Auburn. Now, opposing quarterbacks are only completing 55% of their passes, which I know Trask is at 77% completion percentage this season so far for the Gators. But teams are getting 225 yards per game through the air against Auburn. And I've also seen something that has hurt Auburn at times are screen passes and the quick passes. They have issues with that. Down the field stuff, they're pretty okay, but quick passes and just big play passes have seemed to catch Auburn. And look, Florida's got players that can do that. They've got plenty of great skill position players. The Michael Pirine is one of them out of the backfield. Van Jefferson at receiver is another one that I think Auburn needs to really pay attention to because they're the type of players that can break one on you.
I think you just made some Gator fans excited listening to that because we plan on seeing, because of this Auburn defensive line, a short, quick passing game to get the ball out of Kyle Trask's hands. He's shown the propensity when he does get hit, he may turn the ball over the last couple of weeks since he's taken over there. But we think the plan will be to get the ball out of his hands, get the ball into these playmakers' hands, as you just mentioned. That's one reason I think, Michael Pirine is struggling running the ball, but I still think he is a weapon out of the backfield catching the ball. So, I think you may have just made some Gator fans a little happy previewing how Florida can attack this Auburn defense because that's kind of what we see the plan of attack versus this Auburn defense there. But Phillip, as good as I do, playing in the SEC, at some point, you're going to have to run the ball. And Florida may not have the yards versus Auburn, but at some point, just to keep that defense honest, you're going to have to pop some runs somewhere along the way. And that's where I think Dan Mullen will kind of get creative.
Yeah, most definitely. Maybe just hit them from the outside. Going up the middle against Auburn, is a tough proposition with Derek Brown sitting there. I mean, he's a disruptor. I mean, he is probably – I think Auburn has the best defensive line in college football. I know some people, especially coming to the season through Utah out there, look, that's great. That's the Pac-12. I'm an SEC guy. If Auburn has the best defensive line in the SEC, and that's what people are saying, I'm going to trust they are the best in the country because we'll just look at the track record of the Southeastern Conference. But misdirection could probably maybe cause Auburn some issues. Like I said, but you can't go at the middle. You're going to have to be, like you said, creative, maybe some trick plays to the outside, some reverses or something like that. And look, if you hit a couple of those, you get a couple big gainers on that, then that's going to, spread out the Auburn defense a little bit. Then maybe that does open up the middle of the field where you can run up the middle.
Phillip, and looking at this game, and we just kind of maybe previewed the way Florida can attack, and we did talk, about what Bo Nix and Boobie Whitlow and Schwartz and Stove, what those guys can do on offense. But when you're looking at this Florida defense, what worries you about this Florida defense and what Auburn brings to the table on offense?
If the Auburn receivers can't get open, if they're in the passing game, I kind of worry about that because, and Gus Malzahn talked about that on Tuesday. He is very impressed with the Florida defensive line, and Florida's got 24 sacks coming into the game and 13 turnovers. And look, we've seen Bo Nix go into a hostile environment at A&M, and to a degree when they did a neutral site game against Oregon. Florida's going to be different. That's allowed. It's the swamp. It's called that for a reason. And, so he's still a freshman. He's still a true freshman. I think we kind of are forgetting that sometimes now, how well he played last week against Mississippi State. But this Florida defense has created 13 turnovers. And when you are the underdog, and I know it's a slight underdog. I know Auburn, came out only as a 2-point favorite. But when you are the underdog and you have the ability to create turnovers, and that's not really something Auburn does either. And another thing for people to look out for Florida fans, Auburn has been very loose with the football this season. Against Tulane, Boobie Whitlow had 3 fumbles in that game. And last week, Auburn had 4 fumbles. They lost 3 of them. Auburn's having a tough time with the fumbles, not really interceptions. Bo Nix has only thrown 2 this season. That was both in the very first game of the season against Oregon in the second quarter when he was forcing things. But the fumbles, and if that is going to rear its ugly head against Florida, that's an opening for Florida to get some big momentum, get that crowd behind them. And I just feel like if Auburn doesn't clean that up in one of these big games, whether it be against Florida, LSU, Georgia, or Alabama, that's going to come back to cost them if they don't clean that issue up. So fumbles is a big problem I think Auburn has had this season.
Phillip, you don't have to give a score prediction or anything like that, but we've talked some matchups there, and without a score prediction, if you don't really want to, but how do you see this game playing out? Do you think it's a close fourth quarter game? Is it somewhere Auburn can break away from Florida, or maybe Florida break away from Auburn? I think before the Mississippi State game, I think a lot of people, even outside of these two teams, considered this could be a old school slobber knocker SEC type of game. Then this past weekend comes and Auburn's putting up points on Mississippi State, and we see another instance where Florida can't really run the ball, but they, even though it was Towson, Kyle Trask starts 15 of 15, completed ended up 18 straight passes, dating back to the Tennessee game the week before. Just a couple days before, going into last Saturday, maybe a slobber knocker. After last Saturday, there may be a way both teams start putting up points in this game more so than I thought.
Looking at this game, I know that, and there's a lot of people now, like you said, what Auburn did Mississippi State, and you said Florida having issues running the ball there as well. I think some people are kind of getting a little bit too excited. I know some people are even saying that Auburn deserves to be the number 1 team in the country. Yes, they have 2 top wins, get the top 25 teams, but I'm not quite ready to say they are the number 1 team in college football. But I'm saying all that to say this. I don't think this game is going to be a runaway like some people on the Auburn side are thinking it can be. Because, Florida, they're at home. They have a really good defensive team. So I think their defense will actually keep this game pretty close for most of the game. I don't think either offense will really break away for most of the game. But I do think the simple fact is that if Florida can't run the ball and they are one-dimensional, I do think that eventually could take a toll on Kyle Trask and the Florida passing game. So, and I'll give you a score prediction. I think Auburn wins this game pretty close for throughout, but kind of pulls away toward the end. I'm thinking more like a 30-20, 31-21 type of game.
All right, Phillip Jordan from Last Word on College Football, Talkin SEC Podcast, and 96.9 The Legend out of Dothan, Alabama. Phillip, let our listeners know if they want to catch up with with some more of your work, covering Auburn at Last Word on College Football, and give our listeners kind of a preview of what the Talkin SEC podcast is all about.
Yeah, check out Talking SEC. Was once a week, but now I'm trying to branch out, do 2 or 3 episodes a week there, which every Monday or Tuesday you can catch the recap edition of the SEC Weekend, where I'm joined by also my teammate at Last One College Football, Brandon Eisman, where he covers LSU. So we'll break all that down every Monday or Tuesday when that drops. Other guests during the week. And yeah, check out all my work over at Last One College Football, where I cover the Auburn Tigers. And back on Talking SEC, it's just a show, just talking ball. That's just, whoever's on with me, just back and forth a lot too. But he's, talking about whatever's going on in the SEC. And I hope everybody will check that out. I hope my score prediction and prediction of the game did not change anybody's mind about that. But David, I also want to say I appreciate you giving me this time. Let me on your podcast. It's fun being on the other side of the conversation with you. You've been on mine plenty of times. So I really appreciate you having me on this week.
Oh, absolutely, man. When it was Florida Auburn, it was set in my mind. I was getting you on start talking because not only just Auburn football, but SEC football, college football in general as well. You do a good job of covering the sport we love so much. So when this game was scheduled, a few years ago, and of course as the year started and came along, when it was Florida Auburn time, I was definitely getting you on.
Almost ever. I appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to this game. I hate that they do not play every year. That was the one bad thing. It really came out when they made that rule after 2002. Somewhere in there, when you only had the one permanent rotating team, which of course Auburn and Georgia, that was going to be theirs. Florida was going to be LSU, because I miss. There's some matchups with the expansion of the SEC I do miss. As a person that's been following Auburn for as long as I have, because I miss seeing Auburn play Tennessee every year. I miss they used to play Tennessee more on a regular basis as well. So there's certain matchups I miss, and this is going to be a nice throwback this week. So I'm really looking forward to seeing both teams that were the orange and blue in the SEC go at it this Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. That's Phillip Jordan of Last Word on College Football, Talking SEC Podcast, and 96.9 The Legend out of Dothan, Alabama. Thank you, Phillip.
Thank you, Dave.
Before we move on, guys, you have got to try UFM underwear. It's hot out there, and it's still hot out there in the beginning of October. So whether you're out there tailgating in Gainesville getting ready for the game, or you're out there working in the heat, you need a pair of UFM underwear. Underwear for Men is the only brand of men's underwear that offers both isolation and support, all while keeping you cool. Unlike other pouch underwear brands that have thin mesh panels or pre-sized pouches, Underwear for Men's patent pending design prevents skin-on-skin contact and eliminates chafing. Underwear for Men is a state of Florida company, so you're shopping local when you get a pair of UFM underwear, and they have you covered no matter the activity. Everyday underwear, athletic underwear, work underwear, medical underwear, Underwear for Men is made for it all. Try your pair now. Head over to ufmunderwear.com. Use promo code BREAKDOWN to get $5 off your UFM underwear. UFM underwear. Support your manhood. All right, the narrative of this game changed a bit when Auburn dismantled Mississippi State last week, so it's important, I think, not to overreact to that one game. Now, don't get me wrong, Auburn played great that game, deserves all the credit in the world for putting it on Mississippi State, but are we really supposed to believe they fixed all their previous offensive issues just because of one game? Against Mississippi State, Bo Nix averaged 16 yards per pass in his 335-yard, 2-touchdown day. Yes, you expect him to get better every game as a true freshman. Every game he plays is going to get better. Yes, Anthony Schwartz, his return opens up this offense a bit more. We've seen that the last couple of weeks. But, this was still an offense that was really struggling passing the ball before last week. Even with that performance versus Mississippi State, the Auburn passing offense is still ranked 100th in college football right now at 203 yards per game. So I have a hard time believing they just figured everything out because of the success versus Mississippi State. Now, take it for what it's worth to you, but Mullen versus Auburn the last two times hasn't been too pretty. In 2016, a 38-14 loss, and in 2017, Mullen's last year at Mississippi State, it wasn't good either. A 49-10 loss to Auburn. That was Grantham's first and only season as defensive coordinator for Mississippi State. So, all you can really glean from that is maybe a schematic advantage in what Gus Malzahn and defensive coordinator Kevin Steele bring to the table versus Mullen and Grantham. But So much is different from those games as far as talent on the field goes, but I still think it's worth noting the recent history between mostly the same staffs here. So with Auburn, here's a team that's their style travels well. A team that wants to run the ball with a strong defensive line on the other side of the ball. Those aspects of a team usually travel and play well on the road. But with all the crowd noise that we expect in the Swamp this week, a young quarterback in Nix, and an offense that uses a lot of motion. So hopefully, the timing of the snaps can be thrown off a bit, a few times to get to Auburn in this offense. And I want to start here with the preview with Florida's defense and with the help of the crowd. They can match up well with Auburn and what Auburn brings to the table. The return of Zuniga, Henderson, Miller, Sean Davis are key in helping contain and help tackling as well. Two of the biggest issues when playing Auburn. So the Gators have to contain Nix early, not let him convert third downs with his legs. Auburn has only given up 6 sacks so far in the season, and you have to believe some of that is Nix helping himself by escaping pressure. Keep him in the pocket, make him beat you with his arm, but that's not the only containment worry Florida has when playing Auburn. They'll test the edges in the run game. They'll test the outside with sweeps with Schwartz and Stove, and the Gators' defensive ends are going to have to play sound assignment football. If Auburn gets that outside run game working, it's going to be tough to hold that offense down. With all that said, by running side to side, that's going to open up the middle of the defense and force Florida to have to tackle well. There's going to be plenty of chances for this defensive line, so Schuler, Slayton, Dunlap, Campbell, Ankrum, those guys will have to be ready. These Florida linebackers, these safeties that that may be in the box and there's these one-on-one tackle situations that are going to be there. This is where I think the return of Ventrell Miller and Sean Davis are key, especially Miller. If he's not 100%, hopefully he's still not favoring that shoulder and can play aggressive in making tackle. But once Auburn starts spreading you out, it is imperative for the middle of the defense to stay in their gaps and make their tackles. So the guys I mentioned, along with Amari Burney and David Reese, better bring their lunch pail because it's going to be a physical game, and chances are there are going to be chances you have to make one-on-one tackles going against this Auburn offense. And also, Trey Dean, in talking with the media this week, he really hit home the fact that with all the Auburn's pre-snap motions and movement and the sweeps and the misdirections, that it's important for the Gators to really do their homework this week and study what Auburn and study Auburn and what they like to do. Read your keys on the field. Don't get caught up in the window dressing. And that's easier said than done. We've all watched Auburn for years under Gus Malzahn, and you can see that it's being stressed to these players this week. Auburn was able to hit on some big plays down the field last week. So with the secondary finally being a group that could consist of Wilson, Henderson, Stewart, Davis, Steen, Steiner, that's a group you have to feel pretty good about not letting big plays happen over the top and behind them. You still got to tackle well, got to break down the plays in front of you, but the big plays, that group there doesn't really let big plays happen behind them. So Florida's got to keep that up with those guys on the field. On offense, we know Mullen's going to have his work cut out for him. As mentioned earlier, Mullen hasn't had great success recently versus a Kevin Steele Auburn defense, but this isn't an offense limited to mostly running the ball with Nick Fitzgerald back Dan Mullen's time and the last couple of times he played Auburn. And we know Florida's offense is now more of a passing threat than compared to running the ball. This is the first big-time opponent where we get to see just how open this Florida offense can be with quarterback Kyle Trask, that's hitting nearly 80% of his passes to a deep and talented group of Florida wide receivers. Florida will have to run the ball some, but the game won't be run. The game will be won on the arm and protection of Kyle Trask. As good as Auburn's defensive line is, still built more on stopping the run, allowing just 3 yards per carry without giving up more than 121 yards to anyone so far this season. And that's not to say Auburn's not getting to the quarterback with 13 sacks on the year, but compared to their run-stopping capabilities, there'll be more chances to control Auburn's pass rush as long as the run game can at least be somewhat of a threat, and that's where Dan Mullen's play calling comes into play. This game is it. This game is the chance to try and make up for deficiencies on the offensive line. As I said in the last episode, you can only mask so much as the season goes on. This is a chance to catch Auburn off guard with some wrinkles they haven't seen yet this year from this Florida offense. Is that getting Emory Jones involved more? Maybe, but I don't think you take Kyle Trask off if he starts hot again. Is that getting the wide receivers more involved in the run game? Using Pirine out of the backfield more? There's going to be something we haven't seen in a while, or something we haven't seen at all, thrown out from Mullen in this game. I think he's gonna throw the kitchen sink and see if he can help this offensive line out a bit. Another aspect we may see that we saw a bit more from Kyle Trask last week than in previous games is running a little more RPO and moving the pocket. Those are aspects of an offense that can slow down this Auburn defensive line, and I think were worked on versus Towson for a reason. The pass game is definitely thought to be a strategy to beat the Auburn pass rush, the quick pass game. But with the struggles of the Florida run game, you have to think Auburn won't bring more defenders than they initially have to. They'll drop their linebackers into coverage to make throwing lanes tighter for Trask. Trask is going to have to continue to throw catchable balls, let the wide receivers do some work. If Auburn starts creeping up those defensive backs up to stop the short passes, then it's on the wide receivers to help out, beat press coverage. This could lead to some big plays, one-on-one situations that you have to win in games like this. And speaking of Trask, question, how does he handle the magnitude of this game? He's passed some great tests so far in the rally versus Kentucky and then his first start versus Tennessee. So I think we can feel confident that the moment won't be too big for him, but I think it's worth noting that with everything surrounding this game, the tough game that it is just initially, homecoming, all eyes on Florida, he's handled pressure well so far. Just want to see how he handles it again. And not to be overlooked, close, tight game that we're all expecting. Special teams going to play a big part in this game. Townsend to pin Auburn deep, let the defense do its job, and I think Florida itself will be settling for a few field goals. So hopefully they get in that position, they can score touchdowns. But I do believe Florida can move the ball, may not convert all those into touchdowns, of course. So I'm looking at at least two field goal attempts for McPherson that he needs to hit. Interesting stat here that Chris Fallica, him as Bear on ESPN's College Game Day, provided a nice stat on Twitter that bodes well for Florida and Dan Mullen. In his last 4 games as a home underdog, Dan Mullen is 4-0 against the spread with 3 outright wins. The lone loss was a 7-point loss to number 1 Alabama as a 14-point underdog in 2017. Last year, in Mullen's first year, the Gators won 3 of 4 games in which they entered as an underdog. So with that stat in mind, Mullen's creativeness on offense, Trask playing well, the defense getting key playmakers back, and the Gators playing at home in what would be a crazy atmosphere, the Gators will upset Auburn 27-23. I think there's a defensive score or a turnover where the defense sets the offense up in great field position to steal a touchdown, and I still think the defense stays strong in the red zone, making Auburn settle for some field goals as well. Also, creative score, a big play on offense along the way. This is one. It's going to be tough. The fan of me always has me taking Florida when I see the matchup being close to even in my mind. So 27-23, and I think the Gators walk out of the swamp with a victory. And I ask for some of you guys out there to send me your tweets and your expectations for this game. So let me get a few in here. A lot of you. Thank you so much for responding to the tweet and let me know how you think this game will play out. I wish I could read every one of them, but we'd be here forever. So I picked about 10 here that I'll share. Some of them kind of bleed into each other here, but let's get straight to it. Blake Drury says Gators passing game works early. Auburn adjusts and stop the run completely, but we have good runs in spurts. Auburn runs heavy early, has success leading at halftime, but a close game. Second half, Mullen pulls out his aces, and Florida takes a lead late third or early fourth quarter. So kind of plays out the way the LSU game last year. Expect maybe a tough game. Florida doing what they need to do in the second half, if this game gets to the fourth quarter and it's a close game, you have to have some confidence in what we've seen so far from Dan Mullen, Miami game, Kentucky game, to be able to come out with something. The defense brings it. They may struggle along the game at some point, but when it's time, when everything is on the line, this defense has stepped up. And I think if it's a close fourth quarter game, I think we can feel pretty good about Florida's chances here. Kyle Trask for Heisman at UF Sports 24_7. He says, key to the game for me is our tackling. Worst situation for us would be to allow them to get up early and run it down our throats. I trust Trask to get us points, make the right reads in the passing game. Just can't become one-dimensional and forced to pass every play. So, like I said, I think that's where Mullen's creativity is going to come into play to help this run game get going. I do agree. Florida's not an air raid team. No matter how good the quarterback is, no matter how deep Florida is at receiver, just still not quite built that way. Of course, and you're not game planning that way. You didn't go into fall camp trying to be an air raid team, so I don't think you can just necessarily flip a switch there. But Kyle Trask, as I mentioned earlier, almost 80% completion percentage right now on the season, and just as I mentioned here, the other side of the ball, I mentioned it too. Florida's got to tackle. Watching Auburn versus Mississippi State last week, Mississippi State didn't play physical enough. Auburn's going to come with some wildcat, and it's going to force you to tackle. And we know our Gators have struggled there so far this year, and specifically the last game at Towson and the first game of the season with Miami. So you get some key guys back, some key guys I think are some pretty good tacklers there in Sean Davis, maybe even being the last line of defense sometimes, though. You got to make the tackles, and there's going to be plenty of chances with the way Auburn spreads you out for one-on-one, man-to-man tackling. You got to get the job done. At CLT Gator says, I think our defense will be the fastest and strongest Nix will have seen so far this year, and will end up disrupting Nix. He does not throw a great ball, and I see our DB taking advantage of that with a couple interceptions. Our offense would do enough to take advantage. And there we go. That kind of where I was going to earlier on is Florida's defense getting to Bo Nix, creating some turnovers, and setting up this Florida offense in great field position. And Florida's been able to do that, too, with getting turnovers, turning them into points there this year. So you got to keep that going. But, Nix, like I said, I think way too much is being taken from the way he performed versus Mississippi State. And and I hate doing that. I'm not trying to take anything away from what he did. He deserves full credit. That Auburn offense deserves full credit for what they did versus Mississippi State. But you can't forget everything that happened before that and automatically say they fixed all their issues. Now, they come out and do this against Florida, then you can say that. And it's 2 weeks in a row, but one data point, one sample size of the previous games doesn't mean that. So you got to see it again. I don't think it happens. I think he can play good. I don't see this big, gigantic performance that we saw last week from this Auburn offense. Rafa725 Rafa says, I think Auburn is going to rush 4, counting our offensive line is not going to run block very well, clamping down on the pass, which we actually do well. We need to run semi-okay in order not to be obvious passing situations. So, I think so. You can definitely help Kyle Trask out there. But he's done well, even when Florida runs the ball on first down and gets 2 yards, and it's 2nd and 7. Kyle Trask has still done a pretty good job of either converting that second down or getting in 3rd and short. But, Florida can do better there. I think they're 50%. I think I remember seeing that. That just popped in my head, but I believe Florida's right at 50% in converting 3rd downs this year. So, got to get in 3rd and short as well. But I do agree with you there that Auburn's only going to rush 3-4 guys. They're not going to bring pressure until I think they absolutely have to. But they could see maybe a chance to pressure Kyle Trask and try and get some turnovers there. We know Trask's pocket awareness is not at its best right now. So they may bring pressure just to try and create a turnover by hitting Trask, and we've seen him fumble in those situations a couple of times. So for Trask, it is about getting the ball out. And if you do get hit, you're going to get hit. When you get sacked, hold on to the ball, because I can see where Florida may be deep in their own territory starting a drive, And Auburn, with the way Trask is, kind of being careless with the ball when he gets hit, Auburn maybe sees an opportunity there to get some good field position, and they may bring the pressure, hit Trask, try and create another fumble that we've seen, and set themselves up in good spots. So, with the way, Trask is fumbling the ball, it's imperative that he get the ball out, but when you do get hit, take care of it. Gatorade at D362362121. There we go. So long Twitter numbers there for the name. He says Trask spreading the ball around with quick intermediate passes, maybe a few deep, a few times on a rollout, enough plays to keep defenses guessing. Defense, we got to watch Schwartz on jet sweeps and Nix contained in the pocket. Yeah, hit on most of that too, but yeah, definitely agree on rolling Trask out and getting him away from this Auburn defensive line. Also may help in the previous point I made about him getting hit, fumbling the ball. If you roll the pocket out, maybe not getting hit as much and, limiting chances for turnovers. Gleager says, expect to see a different look than we've seen all season. Lots of screens and swing passes to relieve the offensive line and see more quarterback runs comparable to the Michigan game, where we suddenly saw some tunnel screens and playmakers making plays. Yeah, it just goes back to the point of I do think, I don't want to say Mullen was sandbagging these first 5 games, but learning what your team is made of, learning what your team is about, seeing this offensive line struggle, come up with some creative ways to help those guys out. So, yeah, I do think you will see screens. You'll see some swing passes. We'll see, Emory Jones, I think, open up this run game a bit. I still think there's a chance here now. With what we've seen from him the last couple of weeks, there's still kind of, I don't necessarily want to call it a trick play, but something where you catch Auburn off guard with something he does, whether it be rocker step and play action deep shot down the field, much like we saw against Georgia and when he threw the deep pass to Van Jefferson last year. So, things to look forward to there when Emory Jones is on the field. I think Mullen gets creative with him more so than everywhere else when the game is kind of just in its normal phase. Brent Lee, we'll get a last couple thoughts here. Brent Lee says, I expect a big game from Trask. Auburn's pass defense ranked 94th. Reasons Auburn's defense played great so far was because of their rush defense and defensive lines and linebackers pressuring the quarterback. If Trask reads quick, releases faster than the defensive line is coming, will score 21 or more points. Jesse Scherber says, I expect a lot more Emory using his legs to open up some run game. I noticed during the Auburn-Mississippi State game, only real positive gain State has was running the zone read. So, yeah, I do expect to help this offensive line out. We haven't seen a lot of the speed option that Franks and P. Ryan would run. Not necessarily sure Kyle Trask can do that. Maybe keeping it under wraps a couple times. I think he can probably going back to fall camp, did see all the quarterbacks working on that particular play with the running backs. So it's in there. Kyle Trask knows how to run it. But in game situations, how often do we see him? You got to protect him as well. You're on your backup quarterback right now, so you don't want to be running him more times than you absolutely need to, but you still have to win a game. I'm not a big believer in coaching scared. Look, Felipe Franks got hurt on just a normal drop back passing play and him trying to make a move. It wasn't a design run or anything like that. So it's, you just got to play the game sometimes. You just got to play the game. And Andre Whitfield says 27-17 Florida would get after Nix, force a couple of turnovers, and produce some short fields for the offense. Offensively, we move it good enough to win. Kyle Pitts with 3 touchdowns. And Lance Carlton says, I expect to see a very good game, as it always seems to be with these two teams. I would expect to finally see what kind of team we really are, but I wouldn't throw the whole playbook at this one. With LSU and Georgia coming up, it'll be more of a fight of wills, 27-24 Florida. One thing about that is, I think if you have to throw the whole playbook to win this game, you do it. You got to get out with a W there. They'll have some wrinkles as the season moves along as well, but you win this game any way possible. All right, so before we sign off here on this episode, let's take a look around what's going on in the SEC slate. Not a big slate this week in the conference. Utah and LSU a week before The Gators travel to Baton Rouge and take on the Tigers next Saturday night. Utah State and LSU, that game is at noon. Of course, we know Auburn, Florida, 3:30 on CBS. 4 o'clock, Troy and Missouri. And at 7 o'clock, Georgia, Tennessee. See how Georgia responds after their Notre Dame game in a bye week. And Tennessee had a bye week as well. Can they get anything going after the loss to Florida? Then at 7:30, Vanderbilt and Ole Miss round out what's happening in the SEC. And then another game of note, Virginia Tech at Miami. So how do the Canes respond after a close victory over Jim McElwain a couple weeks ago, and Virginia Tech trying to figure some things out as well. So big game. We're all excited for this big homecoming matchup, top 10 game versus Auburn. Thank you guys for all the listens this week. Gators Breakdown's been out there, and thanks to all you guys and girls out there just for listening, keeping the listens up. Enjoy doing this podcast, and especially for big weeks, big games like this, it doesn't get any better. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.